Hi, Jan. So I have this sheet in front of me, but it's just the questions. You can see I have nothing written on it, just circle which question I'm going to answer. So when I'm referring to the question, I might read it off of this just to make sure I'm answering all the parts of the question, but I just wanted to show you that there are no notes on it, so I'm not using anything with this. Okay, for tier 1, I chose question number 3, discuss what you know about CBM and progress monitoring. So CBM is curriculum-based measurement, which is a method that teachers use to progress monitor to see how their students are progressing. So it can be used for math, reading, writing, things such as that. It can be an informal thing such as daily work samples, or it can be a formal assessment such as probes. So it can be used for criterion reference data. It can be used for norm reference data, which often is really helpful with the probes to kind of see where your student is lining up with every other student or where the average of where your student should be. So I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about curriculum-based measurement, specifically with fluency, which is kind of what we focus a little bit more on in class, and that's what I know the most about. So specifically with fluency and curriculum-based measurement, you can use it for probes. So in these probes, they're short little assessments that you give with your student, and the student is given a story and you have the same story, and you have a copy and they have a copy, and while they're reading it, you're making marks. So what you're kind of looking for is for the mistakes your students are making, and you're just quickly marking it, which is really easy and a nice way for you to get these assessments and these probes and these measurements in, because as a teacher, you often don't have a lot of time to sit down with these students. So it's nice that it's a 1-minute thing to kind of see where your student is at. So if your student kind of stumbles or if they stop, you encourage them to keep going because they only have a minute. And at the end of the minute, you make that marker of where your student ended. So up to that point, you'll get to see the total number of words read. So in our experience in this class, we kind of had a data sheet that showed 3. So it had a chart that had a section for the probe, which the probe is at the level that the student is at. So if it says probe 1.2, it's a first grade level reading probe. So then there's a column for the total words read, which is where you record the total words read no matter the errors. The next column is total number of errors. So that's where you go back and count how many errors your student made. And then there's another column for total correct words. So that's when you take the total words read and you subtract it by the errors made, and you'll get your correct amount of words that were read. So once you filled out your chart, and for example, like I said, we did 3, you would take the total correct words and divide it by the total words read, and you would get a decimal, which then you would multiply by 100 to get a percentage. So for this percentage, it's there to gauge your instructional level for the student and for the reading level that the student is on. So from 90 and below, that is frustration level, which means that your student is frustrated because the work is too hard, which means you need to go back and you need to lower the probe. So if you're at a first grade level probe, lower it down to kindergarten. From 90 to 94 is instructional level, and that is ultimately the level that you want your students to be at. So if the student is on that level, that means the work's not too hard, not too easy, and that the student is excelling, so the student is at a good place. From 95 to above, that is independent level, which means your student's work is too easy. So if the probe is at a 1, you want to think about hiring it to a 2 or maybe even a 3, depending on that student. So that is the experience I've had working with curriculum-based measurement, specifically with fluency. But like I said, it can be used for math, it can be used for reading and writing, and it doesn't have to be so formal with a probe. It can be something as simply as a daily work sample. So the rest of the question says, how will you know your children are making adequate progress? That is when you take your data and you graph it, you find your baseline and your aim line, and you look at the trend line to see, is my student making adequate progress towards the aim line? Is it going in the right direction? It also says, describe some techniques and tools you can use to monitor progress for educational decision making. So like I just said, a graph is definitely one of your best options, because if you're doing all these daily work samples or these probes or these quick assessments for progress monitoring, and you can plot them on the chart, it's a really good visual to see, where is my student at? Is my student progressing? Is my student going in the right direction? Is he going in the wrong direction? Is she making adequate progress? Other ways you can do that is by checklists or daily work samples, or just really anything that you're making and collecting data just to see if your student is going in the right direction. And from there on, all the data that you have, you can make that educational decision of, where do I go next with this child? Do I do harder work? Do I keep the student at where they're at? Or do I need to make the work a little bit easier so my student can succeed?